All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Minyoki. I'm joined by some amazing people here. To my right, I got Aiden. Please introduce yourself.
Man Avila. I'm also taking part in the Living Writings course.
I'm Florian Lepine. I'm actually in a film major program in theater writing, and I had the great pleasure of taking Living Writers this semester.
And I am Jeff Taylor Lane. I'm a English major and I'm also in the Living Writers class.
Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us all today. We are in the KCR studios, basement of Lambton Hall at SDSU, and today we're just going to be discussing our favorite moments in the Living Writers course, um, and how we just experienced it collectively. Today we're going to start off with the We the Jury poems by Wayne Miller. We had some personal favorites in this one, such as, let's see,
On progress.
On Progress. Thank you.
I got you.
On Progress was a personal favorite by Aiden. This one goes into the
Suggested by
history.
Jeff as well.
And Jeff, you already,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that one right there. So, On Progress is about Wayne Miller's grandmother who witnessed the last public hanging in Owensboro, Kentucky in 1936. It kind of goes into some gruesome detail about how people were here at a hanging and they treated it like a festival where there's people selling hot dogs, popcorn, and drinks as if, again, like a festival. It kind of alludes to the nature of the country at the time where people were like very separated by race and felt like it was necessary to experience these sort of like negative atmospheres with such joy. Um, so I thought that was very intriguing. I'm sure my other members have things to say about this specific poem.
Yeah. I was just gonna say it was really interesting to me how he spoke about, well, first of all, I thought it was crazy how he did the research and found out he had such a, I guess, close relation to someone who was taking part in such a gruesome and like horrible public viewing,
Yeah.
and the fact that he was connected to it was the very last public hanging in America was just kind of a trip to me. But
Hmm.
also the way he goes through and describes progress in this, and how your relation or proximity to a certain issue kind of skews your view of it, because he talks about the public hanging that his grandma attended, and then he talks about the online execution of Saddam Hussein, and
Mm.
how there was a huge crowd watching that hanging, and it turned into chaos at the end. But then the hanging on or the execution of Saddam Hussein online had millions of hits, and it just goes to show how one how your proximity or your relation to an issue can skew your view of someone and strip their humanity of that certain person, and also how we've made progress but not really in certain respects. So I just thought it was a really profound and interesting poem.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like the way that he depicts as death as like a spectacle, and how it's like when it's not personal to you, you kind of see it in like this kind of this inhumane like light. Um and I mean it's kind of like present in our media in many ways, like in our like, movies, you see many killings, like TV shows, even like people are very into like these investigation discovery like documentaries that show like about these real deaths, and instead of like kind of being like turned away and like, you know turned off by them, like people kind of get really into these things, and it kind of like sucks them into the idea of like, oh, killings, like, it's kind of that anti-humanist within us, that we just kind of see them as
Mm.
like meat.
Yeah. I like that.
It's also crazy to me how the death sentence still is a thing of the present in some parts of the United States, whereas like for me being from Europe, born and raised in Europe, it's a thing of the past. So that was something very interesting that I was reminded of by this poem.
Yeah. I think moments like these in history where it feels very far off that this happened. 1936 obviously sounds far away, but the fact is that we met Wayne Miller himself, and he said that his own grandma, so like a generation removed, is like was present at this shows like wow, like this is very fresh in American history where things like these were still occurring. And then it kind of plays into how recently people have kind of been executed or in mass shootings this year alone. After the um after the Super Bowl, there was a Kansas City shooting at the parade. Um, that's an example of like public execution where the squirrel behind you. um, the, the yeah, there was a mass shooting directly after at the parade where Kansas City went to celebrate their win. So it's like even in our modern day, we find America still kind of repeating these like mistakes of necessary violence to others just because of difference. Um, I'm sure that I'm not really sure what the shooter was doing in Kansas City or if it was motivated by the fact that it was because Kansas won and he was a Niners fan or something like that. But the fact is that this person saw some difference between people and decided to take it out on the mass public. And obviously, we've seen many riots and different sort of movements against public executions. Um, and it's still apparent today. Florian, I have a question about because I didn't know that in Europe, like the death penalty wasn't a thing. So coming here, do you find that America is a violence-rich country just naturally?
Or that it's more glorified here.
Yeah, is violence glorified in America as opposed to where you're from?
One interesting thing or example on this is how they sometimes rate a movie for certain age groups, right? And they go like PG-13 and something like that. And for example, if a movie is very violent, it gets the PG-13 or even higher very quickly in Europe. Whereas in the United States, not necessarily. But as soon as you see naked skin, that rating goes up in the US. Whereas in Europe, they are more chill as long as it's not sexy necessarily. So that's kind of an interesting thing how that plays out. Yeah.
Yeah, it is like an American value thing. Um, I think it also kind of like shows that like the aspect of killing is kind of like unique to a society and even the
Yeah.
person because Wayne Miller speaks of I can't remember his name off the top of the head, the man that taught him how to boat.
Oh,
That was like he became a professor after killing. It's like George or something, or he has like a last name. So, yeah.
George Miller or something. That's
Yeah, but that was interesting because it's like how you said the guy who like did the K City mass shooting.
got you. George Trebing.
Treving, yeah,
Yeah.
George Treving.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like it's interesting to see that killing can be like either something that's like, you know, this person doesn't deserve to live. There's nothing more they can offer society,
Mm.
like through that death penalty. And then you have men like George, I just forgot his name again.
George Trebing.
Yeah, Treving.
Trebing.
Um, and how he shot his I can't remember the exact relation of her,
So
but
this kind of segues into the next poem of On History.
yeah.
Yeah. Of it's like basically he's saying that George Trebing shot Wilfred Jean Whittaker and left her body in the Trinity River. Um, and obviously, we're speaking about him, meaning that he did not receive the death penalty. And our author, Wayne Miller, was taught how to boat by this murderer. And it goes into what you just said about the value of somebody even after such like atrocity, right?
Yeah, you have killers that like face the death penalty right away.
Mm-hmm.
And then this man was like given time to kind of reform himself, and now
Yeah.
he's like a professor, and he was able to help raise like someone's child pretty much.
Yeah.
Like teach them like, core values of like, boating, like how like what that can do for you as like a person outside of like, knowing how to boat. It's like teaches him, you know, technique and all this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
listening to
Yeah,
his show things, just stuff like that. But like it's crazy how that's like if he got the death penalty, there was no chance of Wade Miller being able to meet him,
Facts.
which is like kind of brings up that humanist aspect that he shows throughout this these set collection of poems.
yeah, it's interesting how he shows the two sides of trading, and he talks about he goes into his crimes right first, and then he talks about how this guy Tom had a fish, and him not having any knowledge of George Trebbing and his past beforehand. He talks about how Trebbing was one of the most like the nicest dudes and one of the most like basically had a very high reverence or view of him, and how kind of similar to on progress, how your relationship with someone can skew your view of them. So obviously to that woman's family, George Trebbing is probably, and I think he mentioned something like this in the poem too, how to them they probably want him to have like the worst punishment. Like to them, he's probably like the worst of the worst, but to him, how someone like that who committed such atrocities could also to someone else be like almost this father figure that taught him valuable skills and was actually a pretty cool dude. And it's interesting to think about how there could be two sides of person to people. You even hear it about serial killers, how they have whole like lives outside of it. They'll have like a wife and kids, but then there's this dark side of them where they're murdering innocent people. And it's just an interesting, I guess, psychological aspect to think about.
Yeah, didn't am I tripping or did they like catch the Zodiac killer or something? Wasn't that something that and it was just like a regular dude? It
Yeah.
was like a regular
They
something.
Yeah, I think they found out what
Was that recent?
based off of like different sketches, they found out who he could have most likely been. I'm not sure if it was confirmed that that definitely was the guy, but they're speculating that this was probably who it was.
Yeah. Um, should we start talking about the humanist poem?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like we're pretty much on that track, I would say.
Yeah.
Get
That's a
on it.
good segue. That's page 82. Yeah,
Yeah,
Wayne
the
Miller.
human.
Sorry.
Oh, I
Wayne
was just gonna say, oh, sorry.
Wayne Miller had some great poems where he just kind of dove into like social, like I think he's a great example of like sociology, specifically with that last piece of someone who committed such atrocities with murdering somebody. He burglarized a home for $7. He tried to assault the girl that he killed and then killed her, obviously. Went to jail and then became a professor and then did jail reform programs for those people and then taught obviously our author how to fish or sail. So it's like I think it's a testament to how people change, but how quickly like society will just like place this image of them, which will evidently change over time. But then like that piece of identity or who they are in the people's mind, like the family of the girl, they probably see George Straving as like the devil, but to somebody who took his class, who like let him slide with extra credit, is God, you know?
Yeah, it's I just lost my train of thought. Oh, oh, it's it's weird how we kind of have this system or this facade of a system that's based on reform and like if people commit these things, they have a chance to a second chance basically at life, but it's only afforded to, you know, certain type of individuals. Like for example, the dude in the hanging that was accused of the rape, and I don't know if I don't I think it's kind of insinuated that he was falsely accused and that didn't happen, or they're not sure, but they just in the flat just gave him the boot or whatever, so to speak. But then George Trabing gets this second chance after just killing someone in cold blood, and he got to live a whole life after the fact. And I guess I kind of lost track of what I was saying, but it's just an interesting duality, I guess, and makes you think in that situation, like how what would because I've seen court cases, right, where someone's family member or someone that they loved is murdered by a certain individual. Oh, I think there was that one where the police officer, the lady cop, uh broke into the wrong house and shot someone's, I don't know if it was his mom or someone, and then he forgave the cop and hugged her and everyone was up in arms about it. But I guess in a we're quote unquote a Christian society, so I guess that uh that's kind of what we're expected to do, at least in terms of the religious aspect of how our society is built, but we kind of lean towards more brutality and whatever the opposite of forgiveness is, resentment. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this leads us to the last poem of Wayne Miller's We the Jury. This is titled The Humanist. Who wanted to touch on this with us?
Yeah, I can touch on it. Let me take a look. So, I mean, might as well just read it. It's pretty short.
Yeah.
When he rose before the jury of his peers, he knew he had arrived at the end game, his beliefs. Mirror against mirror, and when they read to him his crimes, his betrayal of the times, consensus, he saw he would be folded into the body of the human story. He would be judged and found guilty of elevating men to this very position of judgment. The loneliest person on earth is the humanist condemned. When the pyre was lit, it bloated the square with light. The light his body fed. Later, the guards cleaned up in darkness. We have no record of what they said. It's pretty much the end of the poem. Um, I feel like there's like many interpretations you can go with this one. Um, it could be like kind of a telling of like the death penalty, especially with like the pyros that bloated the square with light, the light his body fed. It could be like the cremation of like the after the electric chair, whatever they use now. I think
Yeah.
they do an injection or something like
Yeah,
a
injection.
peaceful. Um, and it just kind of when he said he would be judged and found guilty of elevating men to this very position of judgment. It could be maybe about like a man who did killing, like as they were judged by his killing, he himself would be judged by the jury to be sent to death. So I don't know. I think it could also mean like um a jury itself, like how they see it. It's a unique poem because of like he leaves it just so open ended, and it's kind of like hard to give one straight interpretation. Did you guys remember what he elaborated on exactly with this one? I feel like
Yeah, I was trying to remember. He said something about because his definition of humanist was it was like there's something about like having faith in the good in humanity, something to that effect. But what happens when you as a humanist are condemned and now you're under that light
Mm,
and basically you're not given that opportunity as a human. Like your humanity is stripped away, but a humanist's their whole ideology is basically leaning towards humanity and the humanity in people and the potential of humanity in people. But then when you're condemned, it's kind of, I guess, irony in a way, where it's like, where is the humanity in people when they are condemning you and not giving you that opportunity to have that same humanity? I don't know if I explained that correctly, but
That's kind of tying back a little bit to the murderer who taught him sailing, right?
yeah,
Who kind of did have that humanity, but he had this huge moment in his past where he did not have that humanity, which is where he kind of killed a human being. And the question becomes like how forgivable or unforgivable that deed is, which is really interesting. Like has he lost his humanity forever by having killed a human being? Or do we still think that there's hope? I think that ties nicely back towards that theme wise.
yeah,
I think that that's like a great summarization of how like anyone with the utmost grace and forgiveness and sort of appreciation of life and is very understanding of their fellow human being might not receive that same sort of like love in return in the event of some sort of like damnation. The fact is that because we keep relating it to George Chaving, if our author hadn't done the research that he had done, he would have never known that George Chaving was a murderer. Like maybe a family member would have been like, hey, this is some history about, who, but it even says in the book that the author was doing research on the area that he had lived for him to find out. Up until that moment, he saw George Chaving as like a all-round sort of stout man. It takes like that second guess for people to then pass judgment on you of whether or not you are worthy of my grace or worthy of humanity or humility because of mistakes. And I think that's not really fair to the people that have made mistakes in issues of like we don't know where George was. We're not hearing it from the perspective of him when he murdered that girl. um oh yeah, we're doing um my fault, should have turned the light on.
There's a lot.
But I think there's a light, but yeah, essentially it's like we don't know where George's head was at when he was trying to like do what he did. He seems like he was in a desperate place, and this led to another bad decision, etc. But we can clearly see his life has reformed. He probably has a family. Obviously, he's a family man enough to have Wayne Miller around to teach him how to, boat. So it's like, damn, does George still not have his humility, like Florian said, just because of his past and how grand his mistake was? That's not to belittle the death of the girl, but to point out how humanity is constantly like changing in terms of passing judgment on one another?
yeah,
I think it's all depends on like, yeah. I think it depends on how you personally
Yeah,
feel.
yeah,
Because it's like one of those questions where it's like, oh, how would you feel if like someone close to you, like for example, your kid, like what if your kid killed someone?
yeah.
How would you feel about that? And then pose the question, how would you feel if your kid were to get killed? It just kind of it's like these I feel like when you see like these type of like things, it's like a one-way mirror. Where you see what goes on, but like it doesn't really reflect onto you.
Until it does. And then
Yeah.
it's like you can
yeah,
place yourself in the situation, but then it's like until it really happens to you for you to feel how the people who experience it, feel, then you can't really know the anguish or the bliss of someone's, demise.
Yeah, that's what made the George Travis story so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So essentially, I've just discussed We the Jury poem by Wayne Miller. We kind of went in on that. We had more to do, but Zoom is
We're
yeah.
out of time.
Yeah, we have free Zoom, okay? Living Writers is there's a low budget right now. No, just kidding. But yeah, my name is Jesse Minyoki. Thank you to Living Writers and KCR College Radio for allowing us this space. Thank you to Professor Marshall and the English department for this.
All right. Peace out, whatever
Yeah.
this decides to end, I guess.
All right, take care.